Hey, what's up? You're watching Sit Down. I'm DJ Sixsmith. Andrea Riseborough is here with us. 000, March 6th, coming to Amazon Prime. Nice to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you.
How's everything?
It's really good.
So you had this beast of a project. You're traveling all over the world. You're in many different locations, and now we get to see the full thing. So what was it like putting this whole thing together for you guys?
It was epic. It's shot in 5 different locations. And for the most part, it's actually shot in the real locations it's set in, which is so unusual for anything.
Usually fake it or something like that, right?
Yeah, it's always like, oh, you know, we're doing a story in Iceland and we'll be shooting in Atlanta.
Right.
And which is difficult in itself, because I think wherever you are permeates, it ends up affecting so much of the way that you shoot, you know? So it was fantastic to be in every real location for the most part on this one. And we started off in Louisiana. We were in New Orleans for quite a while, and then Mexico City, and then Calabria in Italy. And after that, we were in Morocco in the middle of the desert, and then we went to Senegal. And we were in those places, each of them for a substantial period of time.
That's awesome. So I look at this picture of you here, and you're really the mastermind of this whole cocaine business here, and you're pulling the strings. So when you see yourself in character here, what are some of the things you start to think about?
Well, it's funny when you look at yourself on the outside, isn't it? I'm always like, oh, I didn't realize she had those pants.
You're so locked into what's going on for your character, you're not even looking at the other things, right?
Also, I think Emma is my character in the story, and the role that she plays basically is that she runs the family business. And she's unwittingly a cocaine dealer. That's not something she'd ever say.
Right, she looks at more from the business angle as opposed to the drugs.
She doesn't, there's a huge, thick fog of denial that lies over their family and has done for many generations. You know, they're a shipping company is their front. But they also probably began as a shipping company. Who knows what they would trade? I mean, it's the port of New Orleans, so they probably have quite a dark history of the things that they were trading in and out of that port. Now they're moving around shipments of pineapples. And I think part of the way that Emma copes with the reality of what she's actually doing is that she is fully invested in those pineapples. But here that's New Orleans there. And yeah, looking at it from the outside, it's funny because when I was playing her, I always felt very much like she was absolutely a man.
What do you mean by that?
You know, there are ways to interact in the world, you know, gender or agender, which involve, you know, some people love being in the divine feminine, some people love, you know, there are all sorts of different phrases for the way that people interact with the world. And Emma was a particularly interesting character because I felt like rather than fight against the system, she absolutely adopted it. So she sort of becomes, in every way, even the way she walks and expresses herself, very androgynous. So it was interesting. It was just interesting to interact powerfully, not really as a woman, but as if one were a man, essentially.
Yeah,
that's the usual thing about Emma.
It's not gender specific, it's not gender focused. You're just focusing on the trade, on the business, and infiltrating this world is what it seems like.
Yes, for her, she wants respect.
Right, whereas you see some of these other shows where it's like, it's a woman, and we know clearly it's a woman, it's like she's here with all the other guys, and that's really the storyline. It doesn't seem like that's the case.
Fortunately, she's not running around in a bikini, which would also be very awkward if you were trying to do a big drug deal.
Can you imagine that?
Really distracting. But she's a really fantastic, interesting character, and there's a wonderful character in the series who's a Don, an old Italian, very, very powerful, of an old Italian, very, very powerful family. And he's almost, I think, in many ways, I think is her role model. I think what she craves and what every figurehead in 000 craves in each different country that we shoot in is respect. And that's not necessarily, you know, respect and power are the two most important things. Roberto Saviano says it in his book 000, where he kind of has written a book about, he sets this world essentially, but without these characters. So the book is about, it's almost a hybrid of literature and journalism. You know, he's taken some things he believes to be fact, hearsay, and really created this epic story about how cocaine, how this world is built on the cocaine trade, how the modern day world relies on the cocaine trade in a way that we may not always be aware of. It's a really fascinating book if you get the chance to read it.
Yeah, what fascinates you the most about this world, the cocaine industry, and just like that balance between power and respect?
I think one of the things that entices me most about it is, you know, you go out on a Friday night, people are partying, you know, they're putting whatever they're putting up their nose on the Lower East Side,
sure,
here in New York. Do they know the journey that stuff has been on?
Definitely not.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's what this series does, is that it interestingly starts off there. I mean, it's not sensationalized, which I love about what they've created, the creators of 000. And Roberto, who wrote the book, was part of creating this series. He's also a screenwriter. He made Gomorrah. But you get to go from what people would deem to be quote unquote civilized society, which is of course completely uncivilized, right, but in New Orleans, all the way back with this shipment of cocaine really all over the world. And you get to see how many people are affected by it, how many people lose their lives because of it, how many people make their way up in their own society because of it, and what it means to people, and the people who move it around, you know.
Yeah, and how they look at themselves and how they try and justify things, like you were talking about with Emma.
I think there's also, in a lot of ways, very little justification, in the sense that the reality is, it is a huge industry. And like any huge industry, whether it's selling really sugary drinks, which are probably very bad for people, or, you know, whatever the huge industry is, I mean, the cigarette industry used to be ginormous and have, you know, huge advertising campaigns. It's a job. It's employing people. That people rely on you. As soon as you start giving people a paycheck, in whatever context, they all do it in different ways in this series, you sort of assume this place in the community, which is a person on whom people rely economically.
Right, and it can be life-changing money for people too. It's not just a little
money.
bit here and there. It's going to alter your status completely.
Yes, and it could be, you know, I mean, everything that we're talking about is illegal. But in a sense, it's a similar business model to something like the drugs companies in the US, you know. So, and it's much of a muchness in the sense
right, but when you strip back legal and
substances.
illegal, it is pretty similar in a sense.
I always think it would be interesting to sort of bring an alien down to earth and say, you know, these small children, they're allowed to have drugs because this man in a white coat prescribed them. And but these people in this club, they're not allowed to have them because these are, I mean, it's such a complex, morally confusing minefield, the world of legal and illegal.
It's really complicated.
Drugs, and so vast. And I think one of the amazing things about the series is that you get to travel with the actual drug to see how just how vast that is, you know. And it's, I mean, it's shot like it's so beautiful and epic. It's the cinematography is incredible. Paolo, our cinematographer, is just extraordinarily talented, and in a way, I think when you watch the series, you get you can start off with an idea about what cocaine is, and it might be very small, and it might be how you relate to it. But then, as we see Emma taking this shipment all over the world, almost you zoom out onto something much larger than you ever could have imagined. And that's kind of how the series looks as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure it's a reminder of just the pervasiveness of cocaine too, because like we talk a lot more about marijuana and heroin today, and of course cocaine is still part of our culture, but sometimes it kind of gets lost in the shuffle, and I'm sure this is a reminder of just the big business and the magnitude of the drug in terms of the full scope of the world here.
Yes, and Roberto Saviano in his book 000 really constantly comes back to that. You know, he says, I'm shouting into, he doesn't say this, I'm paraphrasing, but he's sort of saying that he's shouting into an abyss that nobody's listening. He started with Gomorrah. He then had to become very reclusive because it was a very dangerous book for him to write. And now with this next book that he wrote some time ago and has now turned into the series, he can't get on the ground as much because he doesn't have as much freedom anymore, having put himself in a lot of danger by writing, having written his first book. But he really, I think, wants to expose. I've listened to him talk, but I think what he really wants is to expose just how vast this trade is and how it supports us in ways that we may never understand or be able to compass.
No, I totally understand that. So thinking about some of the other things you've done, I saw you in Bloodline, and I thought that was a really interesting project. Another complicated family situation, certainly an intriguing show. What do you remember about that experience?
That was an interesting experience. It was, it seems like such a long time ago now. It was...
Because your character kind of comes in there and mixes it up a little bit.
Well, and also, I hadn't really had that experience. So, I'd mainly made films and been in theatre. And
then the shift to TV is happening a lot more the last couple of years.
So, and I came into something that was already established, was already
a world. Which is a hard thing to do.
But which was also actually wonderful because it was established in a world. And I knew my character, who was in relationship with Ben Mendelsohn's character, his character was really the only crutch that mine had in that series. John Leguizamo's character also, we worked really closely together. Yeah. But it was very odd to step into a world that was already made. It was incredibly humid. I remember having no-see-ums in my tights on a regular basis. Oh my gosh. That's a vivid memory I have. I wrote some music for it, which I really, really loved writing. It
hit you in terms of everything else going on there, I'm sure.
Well, it's in the series, actually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's in the series. It was an interesting experience. It was an interesting experience. I was playing a child, really, who had a child.
Right.
And very little path, she'd lost. She was incredibly lost. And it was very odd being on those islands there, outside of Miami, because you feel like time stopped there.
Yeah, that must have been weird, but it kind of coincides with what your character was going through in a way.
Absolutely, in every way.
But just so far removed from reality.
So far removed. And to work with Ben Mendelsohn, to work with John Leguizamo, to work with Sissy Spacek.
Yeah, great cast.
Just Linda. It was just a wonderful, wonderful cast.
Definitely. What are some of the other projects that stick out? I mean, Oblivion, there's Battle of the Sexes, there's Birdman. What have been your favorites?
I mean, Birdman.
That's a special one for sure.
Birdman was something that none of us. I mean, we really didn't know whether it was. I wasn't worrying about whether it was going to work because our helmsman was possibly one of the most talented people on the planet.
Right, you had that going for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so we all had a huge amount of faith in him. And he has a lion's heart, so you feel like if Alejandro's going to take you somewhere, you feel safe. You know, there's some sort of safety in it, even though the note might seem completely obscure, or he's like, go with me.
But you just got to trust him, yeah.
His hair's all over the place, and he's been thinking about it for a long time when he approaches you. But it was an amazing feat in the sense that we really had no idea whether it was going to work at all. I mean, the only thing that I could reference, that I could think of, was Russian Ark. Have you seen that film?
No, I haven't seen it.
If you get a chance, watch it. It's basically about Russia's history in one shot. It's and you know, there are stitches, like in Birdman, there are stitches, and we all kind of are quite secretive about what those stitches are, you know, and how they happened. But it was in a way like being in a play, Birdman. And so, and that was the first time in my film career that I'd had an experience that felt so close to home for me, because I was in theatre from 9 to 20.
Yeah, it's hard to replicate that in a film.
Yeah, and a lot of the other people who were in the film had never been in the theatre. They were actors who really didn't do theatre.
Right.
So that was really interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Amy Ryan and Ed Norton and I had done a lot of theatre, and I felt very at home being there, but also it was completely surreal. For the first 3 weeks of rehearsals of Birdman, we taped out what the corridors were going to look like on the floor, on a soundstage in Warner Brothers in you know, Studio City. And it turns out that didn't help at all in any way, because you know, when walls are real, it's a very different situation. And suddenly when a camera crew's there, Chivo and all of his team are behind him, it was a complete clusterfuck at many times, you know. And so it was almost like choreographing a strange dance, and in that way it was strangely theatrical.
Yeah,
so we were inside of a theatre choreographing this thing that we did sometimes hundreds of times over in order to get it right. And there were some days when I remember it was about 6 p.m. We'd been going since like 10 in the morning. We didn't have anything in the bank yet. Wow. We had nothing in the bank. You know, I mean, we were still working out how to get that one
Right. It was so specific shot. And so complicated in some ways, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So how long did you guys shoot that?
In about 2 minutes. I mean, that's the other thing. You know, for very little money and in about 2 minutes. Obviously, a lot of the budget goes to, for people who haven't seen it, I don't want to ruin this, but a lot of the budget goes to post.
Right. The production.
For reasons that you'll know if you've seen it. But yeah, we shot it in about, I think, what was it, 6 weeks maybe.
Wow.
If that.
And then for it to get the recognition that it does after the fact is pretty remarkable if you think about it.
I feel like anything that Alejandro's he was a really prolific and very well-respected disc jockey, you know, and so, I mean, his ear for music, his sense of rhythm and timing, his focus is just, it's like, it's a gift to be around, especially if you sort of, you know, perfectionist and you're excited about something like that, you know. I was working with Chivo as well. I think was one of the great privileges of my life, really. He's one of the nicest people that you'll ever work with, and such an incredible DP. I mean, he just would get in there, you know. We'd be trying to do some sort of shot when, you know, he's on the floor and Naomi's up here, and we're trying to fit everyone in at the same time, but we also have masses more to fit in, because then Chivo's going to run down the corridor and follow Michael somewhere.
Yeah.
And everybody involved in Birdman, I think, muscularly stepped up.
And you can still talk about it all these years later too, which is pretty fantastic.
It's really interesting, yeah. It was really, I think, I loved it. I think it was a wonderful film.
That's awesome. Who are some other people that have excited you along the way, or have just moved you in terms of those experiences?
I love working with Steve Buscemi. I've worked with Steve Buscemi twice now, and hopefully we will again soon. He was in something that I produced I met him on Death of Stalin, which was another brilliant experience. Armando Iannucci is an amazing writer. I laugh because it was just it was really, despite the fact we were making a film about Stalin, and the first word in the title is death, it was one of the funniest, most sort of indulgent experiences I think you could ever have as an actor. Because,
that's really interesting.
You know, there were actors from straight comedy, from Shakespearean theatre, you know, across the board. We had such a strange mix of people, which it turns out came to reflect the Kremlin quite accurately.
Interesting, yeah. That's fair, yeah.
But that was a really wonderful experience. And Steve's just a massive inspiration because he's such a lovely human being. I really like working with great people.
It goes a long way, right?
I mean, and also I think as an artist, you know, the humanity that somebody like Steve has is always reflected in his work. You can't help but, whether he's playing something sinister or very warm, you can't help but love him. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is my own company, which is called Mother Sucker. We had a film at Sundance in competition there a couple of years ago, and Steve is in that as well.
Which one was that?
It's called Nancy.
Okay, right, yeah.
And the director of Nancy, Christina Cho, who has now worked with Jordan Peele and Ava DuVernay, and she's doing really fantastically well, she is somebody I love working with. She's fast and decisive and hysterically funny, and she writes really, really beautifully. And she won the screenwriting award at Sundance for that film, so that was great.
How long have you had your company for?
It started in 2012 when I was really pissed off.
What were you most pissed off about?
I was pissed off that I was in a film that I'd sort of started off being the lead in, and I felt like it was important to do, maybe because you didn't often see a woman in this kind of a role, so I thought that was important. And then I sort of got to the set, and it turned out that I wasn't really the lead anymore, and that I was the wife, you know, and things had changed somewhat. And that was, honestly, I mean, it just made me think, stop feeling disappointed and stop expecting magical things to happen. If you want to be part of creating things that have a 90% female crew or 60% women of color, you know, whatever you would like to see in the workplace, create it.
Go do it, yeah.
And it's always something that, you know, I've always been proactive in that way. I've always written and explored directing and producing, but to just start something like that and then to have a film in competition at Sundance was such an incredible. It was unbelievable, actually. It was unbelievable. And when we got into Sundance, we couldn't afford to go. Wow. Because, you know, we didn't have any money left.
Right.
So
you'd put everything into that project.
So we, so very, very kindly, the philanthropic Tory Birch, without asking anything of us, supported us.
Wow.
And sent us to Sundance. That's awesome. All of these women who made this film. So I'm really proud of that, and it's wonderful that Steve was able to be part of that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
John Leguizamo is also in that film.
Nice. Okay,
so there's a lot of people that we picked up along the way, you know, all in the film together.
But yeah, you know how it goes from something at ground level to just getting it to Sundance to just getting it to see people. It's such a difficult thing to do.
And also to not have it marketed in a way that is totally unrealistic.
Right, because if that narrative is shaped in a different way, then your
people
movie
have the wrong expectations, and they feel disappointed. You know, it's a thriller. It's really a story about a woman and a cat.
Right.
It's a thriller. Yeah. It's still a story about a woman with a cat.
Right.
So,
but again, it goes back to who the gatekeepers are, who are the people that are telling the stories, who's talking about these stories,
and how much fast cash they want to make. You know,
that too. Yeah.
you know, how much many bums in seats, as we say in the UK, how many bums in seats they want to get, how immediately, or whether they want to make something, not only, I shouldn't say make something because we made it, but whether they want to package something as something that is lasting and eternal and unique.
Right.
You know, one of the things I loved about Birdman was that it occupied its own space. It lived in its own genre almost. You can't really put it anywhere. I also love that about Mandy, a film that I made with Panos Cosmatos, who I think is an amazing director. You know, that's an horrific film in many ways, but it's so cerebral and lives kind of in its own world, and it's really an expression of him grieving his parents' death.
And we need more movies like that too.
Yeah, I mean, what better way to grieve your parents' death than Nick Cage with a chainsaw? You know.
Yeah.
But innovative work is, I think, what we should be leaning toward more and more and more. And I think on a financing level, without getting my producer hat on too much, but on a financing level and a distribution level, the further we move away from what a film is and how we understand it. So what is it? I don't understand this. I feel like I'm constantly having conversations with people about that, trying to sell it before it's even made. But that, I think, is reductive in terms of creating beautiful, lasting, extraordinary film. You know, if you were to go into a room and try and explain 8.5 to someone, you'd be like, okay, bear with me.
Right, you need more than a sentence to describe the film.
And we wouldn't have 8.5, or we wouldn't have David Bowie, or we wouldn't, you know, there are so many things we wouldn't have had. There's actually a brilliant interview with David Bowie where somebody's like one of those early awful MTV car crash interviews, you know, where they're just like, I mean,
you're like, what are we doing here, guys?
Just dreadful.
Yeah.
And they say to him, how do you always know what people are going to like next? And he says something like, I don't know what people are going to like next. I just make things, and then sometimes people like them. You know, it's like
right. Just being real simple about it.
Don't try and anticipate. I mean, if you're in the game for money alone, I completely understand why you would think that algorithms might help. But actually, I think the reality is with human beings is we really respond to authenticity more than anything.
Yeah.
And when you see something authentic, like Emma here. You know, she's essentially her own Don in New Orleans, and she's pulling all of the strings, and she has her family. Dane DeHaan plays Emma's brother, he plays Chris. Gabriel Byrne plays her father, Edward. There's really nobody holding it together like she can. She's almost completely put aside. She's a really interesting character because she's completely put her own personal life aside, I think, for the betterment and for the empowerment of her family.
I think that happens a lot for people, whether it's this kind of business or just their jobs in general.
I think it happens a lot for people, and we don't always see it.
Yeah.
In, you know, especially in women on screen.
Yeah.
And it happens every day. Single mums of 3 who are working how many jobs and studying at the same time to get a degree, you know. So, yeah, she's a really fantastic, interesting character.
Awesome. Looking forward to it. Really nice to meet you.
It's lovely to meet you.
Thanks so much. 000, March 6th, Amazon Prime.